there, friends. Welcome to Global Glory Chasers. I'm your host, Dorina Lazo Gilmore-Young, and I am just giddy with excitement to be back to podcasting after a couple of years. This fall, I'm releasing this new season of Global Glory Chasers with a focus on food, books, and travel. And if you know me, you know that those are some of my passions. And if we are just getting together for the first time, know that this will be an adventure feasting on the glory of God. And so I'm going to be hosting conversations with artists, chefs, authors, teachers, and others about food, books, and travel and how that intersects with faith. And so I'm really excited that today I have an award-winning author, Mitali Perkins, someone who I greatly have admired from afar and also gotten to interface with a little bit more closely up in the last year. And we're going to talk about some of those things. So if you're interested in seeing the Imago Dei in people and cultures around the world, these are the conversations that will guide you and inspire you and hopefully equip you as you want to share that with your family. And we're going to go ahead and jump in. I want to welcome Mitali. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Oh, Doreen, it's a joy to be with you. I'm so happy to have this conversation.
Well, I want to introduce you a little bit, but I'm sure more details about you will come out in the conversation as well. I love just seeing the intersection of many different things that you are doing right now, including publishing books for kids, middle grade, and even beyond that. You've had one of your books that was developed into a movie, The Rickshaw Girl, that I saw a few years ago, was inspired by. You've been doing a lot of traveling, writers in residence at Hollins University in Roanoke, Virginia, at Calvin University in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And as UC Davis is coming up, California being your home. I wanted to just jump in by asking you if you would share a little bit more with our audience about your cultural heritage and kind of where you grew up.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I was born in Kolkata, India, but that is actually not my ancestral heritage. It goes back to a village in what is now Bangladesh. My parents, in the War of Partition, they were young and they had to run across the border to India. And so they left their villages then and had a fresh start in India. And then when I was 7 years old, we left India and moved to London. Actually, when I was 3, we went to Ghana and Cameroon, came back to India, went to London, then New York, then Mexico, then California in 7th grade. And then I've just traveled a lot of different places since then and made a lot of places home. I wrote a book called Home is in Between. It's a picture book. And I feel best when I'm sort of between cultures or I'm in threshold places or bridge places. That's kind of where I feel at home because I've moved so much. The closer I am to a border, the more I feel at home.
And that's partly why I wanted to invite you to be part of this conversation with me today, because I know that that's something that is so key to who you are as a person, but also your writing. As part of our show is to explore God's glory through exploring different cultures and different places. All these different places that you have lived and different cultures you have been a part of certainly inform just that identity in Christ. So I want to ask you, just kind of as a follow-up with that, when did you know that you wanted to pursue writing and publishing?
Well, I always wrote. Even as a young girl, I had diaries and I wrote poems and things, but I never actually thought it could be a career. We immigrated here, and I always tell people we had 3 choices. There's 3 of us girls. I know you have 3 daughters, so there's Sonali, Rupali, and Mitali, and I was the youngest. And our career choices, I think you heard me share this at Calvin, were engineer, doctor, or engineer, right?
Yeah.
So a career in the arts wasn't what I was excited even thinking about. That's why. But I always wrote, and I always read a ton of fiction and wrote fiction in my little diaries. When I was 8 or 9 years old, I began writing stories and poems and things. So it didn't become a career. I just wrote a book about this too that's coming out in May 2025. It's called Just Making, and it's about persevering on sort of long obedience in the same direction in the career in the arts when there's internal pushback and external pushback.
Mm.
How do we just keep making? How do we keep keep going in the field of creativity, because there is so much pushback, since the arts really are not valued maybe in the same way that other fields are valued, whether
Mm-hmm.
you're an immigrant or not, right? It's hard to make money in the arts.
Mm-hmm.
So and that shows you what's valued, right? So by a culture. So I wrote that book, and it just shares my journey about how I got so many rejections and so many closed doors and so many obstacles, but eventually, bit by bit, I thought, I'm going to be all in and decide to be an author. So I took a big risk. Thankfully, my husband was supportive. Him a patron of my arts. I could have done it if I was, at that much risk as a single mom or as a single person. Now I'm a full time writer, Dorina. I can't even believe that I am. It's a miracle.
I can relate to that journey so much. It's interesting because I was that little girl as well. I was writing poetry and I was like creating the little stories in my notebooks. And I love how even that kind of comes up in some of your writing. I just finished reading your Hope in the Valley. I
Oh,
believe that's a middle grade book, and I love how the main character is a poet in there, and it's just how some of her personality comes out through her poetry. So it's fun to kind of hear the backstory of how that was a part of your life as well.
well, actually, the poems in that book were ones that I wrote when I was 11 or 10 or 11. So they're word for word poems that I
Oh,
wrote
I
when I was,
love it.
yeah, when I was 11-year-old Mitali. And it's kind of fun. I got to co-author a book with 11-year-old Mitali, really, by putting the poems that she wrote. I mean, I tweaked it a little bit, but not that much. The poems that are in there are pretty much as from my diaries from back then.
My goodness. Okay, now you're inspiring me to go back to my 10 and 11-year-old diaries. I wonder if there's any gems in there.
You'd be amazed how little your voice changes. Voice is not something that you can learn a lot when it comes to craft, but voice is one of those things that is comes from the inside, and
Hmm.
those that doesn't it gets maybe gets a little more refined, a little more confident, a little bit more clear, but it doesn't. The heart of your voice doesn't change much from when you were first using your voice. Each of us has our own voice print, like we have our own
Hmm.
fingerprint. And so the artist's voice, I find, doesn't really change that much from childhood to adulthood.
Wow, that's interesting to think
Yeah.
about, especially just, being now in my 40s and trying to think about what is my voice or what is my niche. Maybe I should go back to some of those journals and go on a little treasure hunt.
Yes, absolutely. Let me know if you find anything.
One of the things that I noticed that is on your website is this quote that I love that you say, one of life's greatest joys is to create spaces where young people feel safe, welcome, and beloved. And stories are just one of those such spaces. And I've seen that through your various writing. You have picture books through writing for young people. But tell me a little bit more about what that quote means to you and where it comes
Mhm.
from.
Well, I know that that wasn't really what I had in childhood. I would add one more verb there. I think I said safe, welcome, and beloved, right? And I was beloved. I can say that. My parents loved us deeply, but safe wasn't a word I'd use for my childhood. And welcome, I never really felt, because I never really fit in anywhere we went. I was always the outsider, the newcomer, the immigrant. Um, and then when it comes to feeling seen, I was a shy child, Doreen. I think a lot of us who are writers were people who see more than are seen.
Yeah.
And so the place where I felt most welcome, most safe, and most seen was really in stories. And I started reading very early, and I would feel those were a space that was a place where I thought, yeah, I'm like Anne of Green Gables. I love writing, and I have big imagination, and I love nature. Hey, I'm like Joe in Little Women. I have sisters that I would do anything for. I saw myself so reflected in so many stories, and and that when you do that as a child, that skill of seeing yourself, finding windows, finding mirrors, and every kind of stories, even
Mhm.
though they throw open windows. I didn't know what Prince Edward Island was, but it became a home for me. As
Mhm.
did, Cambridge, Concord, Massachusetts in the 19th century, as did Narnia and, Middle Earth, and all the books that I loved so much became homes for me, and places where I felt seen and reflected and always welcome. I still reread those books for that same feeling of being seen, safe, welcome, and beloved, really. So I knew I wanted to do that with my stories, especially I think lately helping kids feel seen is in a story is really important to me.
So let's dig into that a little bit further because I know you have such a breadth of different books that you've written. Are there any books that maybe you could give us as an example where you really were intentional about that or that could just be helpful for families or teachers who want to help their students be seen?
Yeah, so I Hope in the Valley for middle grade. It's about a girl who didn't want to grow doesn't want to grow up because I did not want to grow up. Growing up seemed so complicated with my
Yeah.
two older sisters starting to get in trouble, and I wanted to just cling to childhood, and I didn't want I don't like change. I am very I got to hold on, and so I wanted to explore. And I think as a nation, we're dealing with this whole issue of what do you keep from the past that's good when you have a painful past, right? As a nation, but there's things that we can't just all throw away, right? We have to learn and incorporate the past into the present for the sake of the future. And that is Pandita's quest for her community and for herself. How do I take things from the past? I can't go back to the past, but I want to bring the best things forward into the present, and weave them in. I mean, there's a whole metaphor of the braid, her braids, and braiding in the past,
Mm,
present, and future. And so that would be something that I did as a child. I tried to do that as an adult, not let go of everything from the past, but bring the best forward and weave it into the present for the sake of the future. And that's kind of what I'm for the next generation, right? So that's what Pandita's quest is. So I say Hope in the Valley is that exploration of how can past, present, and future be intertwined in a life of service and back to the community. And that's my picture book that's coming out. It's called What's Between Your Hands, or I'm sorry, it's Between My Hands, and it's about that namaste gesture, in Indian culture, which can mean, people in yoga use it, but I think in the literal meaning, it means what's between my hands when I want to serve the world, when I want to namaste the world. At least that's what this little girl's grandfather tells her. And so she has little hands, right? And she wants to serve. And she sees big hands doing big things, but what can little hands do? And so this
mm.
is a picture book that takes a look at. It's really based on that scripture verse in Corinthians that says the greatest is love, and it takes a look at mercy and justice and what big hands can do. Maya is her name, and Maya means love in the Sanskrit and in my language Bengali. And so I would say those two books kind of give you a sense of how to. I really do think children have a heart to serve. They want to. They want to do small things with great love, right? And if there are teachers and parents who want to encourage their kids to find a way to serve, both those books at different ages would give them a place to start to have that conversation.
I love that. And I think about my own girls. I mentioned to you before, my daughters are 12, 15, and now 18. So I'm launching a young adult into the world just this week. But one of the things that was a high value to me as a young mom when my girls were younger, we actually lived in the country of Haiti. So we did some mission and nonprofit work in Haiti. And I always wanted to bring my kids along when we were serving. And I know for some people, maybe have a different philosophy with that, like, have the kids have a nanny or, do other things at home. But for me, I felt like the education was to bring them along. And it was
Mm,
always so powerful to me to see how God would open doors for me to serve through my children. It wasn't that
mm,
I was leading them to do that, but that they had their own individual kind of vision for that. And I think it really comes through in your Hope in the Valley book too, Pandita Paul. The main
mhm.
character has this sense of justice and service. I love that you tell her story because it gives us as readers and hopefully younger readers that picture of how could you be involved or how could you um, use your creative gifts that God has given you, or how can you raise your voice if there's something that you see as an injustice. It's really beautiful the way that you do that in the book.
Well, I'm a big believer in local involvement, neighborhood involvement. I feel like we get overwhelmed with the big national and even state level politics. And I studied political science and public policy in
Okay.
college and grad school, so I'm interested in politics. But it just feels like for us, there's a sense of localism in our neighborhood, and it's amazing what a difference you can make in the quality of your life and the quality of your neighbors' lives if you can just focus on your local area, your local neighborhood. And there's
Mm,
so much that our neighborhoods offer that we can do, and kids can get involved too, in that particular way. And I guess it goes back to that idea of using our bodies, and our bodies are here in a particular space. And so even though now virtually we're digitally, we feel like, oh, we're so connected to the world and to the nation, and all the politics are capturing our attention. When we put our bodies outside where we live, no matter where it is, and we say, okay, what can these little hands do? And that's what
mm,
Maya's asking in the picture book. And that's what Pandita's asking too, right? In her community. How can I make the place where I actually have my body? How can I make that a better place for myself and my neighbors? And children are, I mean, they want to do that. I
mm,
know that I, as a child, really cared deeply about justice. There's the sense of true north that children have when things are unjust.
mm.
I wrote a book about the border wall, and as I talk about it, it's called Between Us and Abuela. I have three Between books with Macmillan: Between Us and Abuela, Home is in Between, and then this Between My Hands.
Okay.
And Between Us and Abuela looks at a nuanced. It takes a nuanced look at the border, which means it got critics on both sides of the political divide who didn't like the book. But I feel like children get it, and they ask the
Mm,
right questions. Why can the grandmother not see the grandchildren, and just why do they have to go
mm,
between a fence? And they ask the questions, but then they also ask, like about law, about the rule of law in that book, because there's border patrol officers that are just trying to do their job.
mhm,
And so those nuances of how do we hold rule of law in the same place as mercy when a grandmother wants to see her grandchildren and just give them a hug, right? How do
mm.
can those two things coexist? And children love to go there and think about that. And even 5 and 6 year olds, I've had the best discussions with them about those two things, when they get their minds around it, and they think, like, some little boy will inevitably raise their hand and say, I'd get a big truck, a bulldozer, and I would just bulldoze down that fence. And I ask, but there's bad guys who want to come in, right? Like, there's lots of questions you can ask, and you don't give
Mhm.
them the answers. You just help them think about the nuance, because adults are quick to find the answers. We can help children in those formative stages through books. Just give them space and air around their questions. You'd be surprised how much true north their questions reflect, and how much they care about justice and mercy.
I love how your books are so invitational in that way. Um, it's not like it's trying to push a certain agenda, but it's to open the question and to
Mm.
even to consider the different sides. Like you said, there's nuances to that. And it's not that, oh, this is a topic, that's off the table for kids, that there's ways that they can engage in it, and you've humanized it.
Unfortunately, it doesn't make for a lot of bestsellers because people don't want the nuance. They don't want the room for kids to engage with different points of view. Or, like, I don't vilify characters in that easy trope way of, oh, they believe this, so they're the villain,
Mm,
right? I try really hard not to vilify a character that has a different point of view than even I do.
mm,
So I may not like what my character believes in, but I'm trying hard to represent their point of view, because they care about their community too, but they have a different solution than I might offer, right? But that takes a lot of work, and it also doesn't get a lot of good responses because people think children just need black and white, as
mm,
opposed to helping children do that Socratic method of education, which we don't do well at in the United States, where you teach a child to ask questions, and there's room to disagree,
mm.
and in civility, and that we don't do that well. So
Yeah.
adults really want my books to support their point of view, and when it doesn't do that fully, they get confused. They're like, "Oh, I thought Mitali was in our camp, and this book doesn't quite fill that." And then, it doesn't make for bestsellers, Dorina. If you put nuance in your books, but that's okay. I'd rather do that.
Well, as a mama and as a teacher, I want to tell you that these are the books I want for my kids. And I think also there's something that is so congruent with Jesus' ministry in that. If we think
Mm.
about that faith context and the biblical context, as I read about Jesus, he was so good at asking questions.
Mhm,
He was
mhm.
so good at inviting people to tell their stories, to give their perspectives, whether it was a woman who was bleeding for 12 years or a little girl or a Pharisee. He was constantly asking questions. And so I think you're modeling that for kids through these fiction books.
Thank you for saying that. That's so encouraging. I mean, I know that. I love that about Jesus. 3 years of ministry, and he had told a ton of stories and let people ask a lot of questions. Right? Those are hallmarks of the way that he taught. Um, so I think that if we want to truly do, tell, just follow in his footsteps in this realm of literature, we have to leave a lot of room, a lot of air, and not offer quick answers. I think as Christians, especially, we don't need to be fearful people. We have a big God. And so
Hmm.
there's a lot of fear in letting go of the black and white and the strong answers, especially for kids, because we think, no, it's too scary. But that's not how Jesus operated. He never operated out of fear.
Hmm.
And so to leave something more gray is uncomfortable for us because we are fearful people.
Hmm.
But if we have a big God and children and a big God who said, let the children come to me, don't hinder them. We don't have to get in the way of that process of children coming to Jesus, gathering around his knee and asking questions with our strong adult voices that tell them in a rigid way,
Hmm.
this is what to think, this is what to believe, this is how to believe, and anything apart from that is not right. And children sense
Hmm.
that in their spirits when adults are being pharisaical, really, and rigid in our religiosity and in our not even. And it happens with people who aren't religious either. They're both sides, right? People who are religious make this mistake, and people who are not religious make this mistake of thinking children of simplifying the way children think and trying to give them strict answers through
Hmm.
literature, which is that's not what stories are for. So
Hmm. Well, I love that your voice is not didactic in that way. It is invitational. And I see that in your new book. So I want to give you a chance to share a little bit more. You already kind of hinted at it, but Between My Hands is your new picture book that is releasing this month. And I wonder, what was the inspiration behind that book?
wow, that's a good question. It had so many iterations. I know what it was. I was thinking about I did it more like, I didn't make it a story about a little girl. It was more about the ideas, big themes like how children could serve with justice and mercy and truth. So there's three, and I wanted to kind of I wanted to get three biographical heroes of mine to illuminate those three themes, right? So I was thinking about, maybe some of the unsung heroes that are in South Asia, like Pandita Ramabai is one of my heroes. She's referred to in the book. Pandita is named after her in Hope in the Valley, but she was a woman who, like me, came from a not a Christian background, became a follower of Jesus, and then championed widows and orphans in this phenomenal way. And so I
Mm.
wanted to kind of illuminate these themes of mercy with these biographies. So that's how it started. And then,
Okay.
of course, my editor, Grace Kendall at Macmillan, I come up with these ideas like themes, and she's like, Mitali, you should tell a story. You're good with character. And I do love character. As soon as I invented the character of Maya in the book, and I get her in a place, she lives in Oakland, California. I've been working with a nonprofit for 8 years on the board of Harbor House. The book is dedicated to Harbor House. And we serve one community in Oakland, and there's a lot of tons of immigrants and refugees in that community. And so once I set her there in a particular place and have a particular character, then it becomes much easier for me to tell the kind of story I like to tell. So my editor's a genius, and so this is the story of Maya. She lives in Oakland, and her neighborhood's changing, and big things are happening all around her, and people are trying to enact change for that community. And she's watching people come and go and come and go, and they're doing big things. And she's out there and she's thinking, what can I do? But meanwhile, she has a neighbor next door. It's this little old Victorian house. The illustrator is Naveen Selvanathan. Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah.
He's actually the art director for Netflix.
Oh,
So he's
wow.
very talented. He's behind a lot of the art on some of the like the Puss in Boots and some of the other things. He's done a lot
Oh,
of
the
that.
illustrations are so
Yeah.
delightful. I
So I
love it.
left a lot of room for the illustrator in the story because I'm trying to pull back more on my in being heavy-handed in lots of ways. So I came up with the text and then Naveen illustrated it. And so there's an old Victorian house next door, and Maya lives in a gentrified kind of apartment building,
Okay.
and so it touches a little bit on that. But next door is this elderly woman, and she's always asking me. She's like, Maya, I need your help. And of course, sweet little Maya just drops everything and runs over there to help her. But she doesn't see yet until the end of the book that that's the answer to her question about what's between my hands when I namaste the world. She's thinking of
Mm,
big things, but in the little way that she's helping her next door neighbor disentangle the wool or thread a needle, what little hands can do that big
yeah.
hands can't do is very powerful. And so Naveen did an amazing job illustrating the ways that Maya's actually already serving. And then at the end, we
Mm,
get this aha moment where Maya says, "Oh, I little hands can do little things, and I've been doing it all along. I've been doing these little acts of love, like Mother Teresa says, little things with great love." That
yeah.
Maya's already been doing that all along, so she sees that in herself, and so that's that picture book, and it was a joy to write because I was able to make it, a story, which is really my forte. I don't know why I start thinking about these big themes, right? And then get distracted by the themes, but I let go of a lot of control in that book, and I'm really happy with how it ended up and the collaboration with the illustrator as well as just more air around the story. So, yeah.
Well, as a writer, that's inspiring to hear, just kind of letting go of that control a little bit. And then just being able to look at the pictures and see how that message just really comes alive so powerfully through Maya's hands. So
Yeah.
I want to encourage our listeners, if you haven't heard of that book, definitely go check it out. Just it's a new release, Between My Hands. We will put the link in our show notes if you want to take a look at that. And just we have a couple minutes left here, Mitali. I want to ask you, it sounds like you have done a lot of traveling in your lifetime. But if you got to choose a place that you could travel anywhere in the world, where would you like to go in this season of life? What's kind of on your bucket list still?
My goodness. Well, you just got back from France. I followed your trip on social media. That looked amazing. Have you heard of the concept of flaneur? Flaneuse, being a flaneuse?
No, I
Have you heard
haven't. Tell me about
that?
it.
Okay, so back in the day, when there were, men of letters and arts in France, they can't remember who invented it, but there was a word called flaneur, which meant a person who in solitude wanders a town and takes
Mm,
it in at a slow pace of a walk with all five of your senses. And so I travel a lot alone, and I try to become, and the female version of it is flaneuse. And I always think to myself, I'm going to let this town host me, this place. Actually, I'm going to let Jesus host me in this town, and I'm going to just take it in. I'm not going to have an agenda. I'm just going to take it in at a slow stroll, and I'm going to go pop into this bakery and taste this croissant with all five senses, right? So I love traveling like that. I love slow travel in a town where you let the town unveil itself, right? And uh, so I would do that. I do that everywhere I go. I don't even care where it is. But on my bucket list, please, anyone from Australia and New Zealand, can you invite me to come and do an author visit? As I'd hop on a plane in a heartbeat and go there. Those are places I haven't been. I've been to
uh-huh.
many, many places. I'd love also to explore more of South America. Those are some places. I've been to Mexico, but I would love to see Guatemala, Honduras, Belize, that Central America um, there. But yeah, definitely Australia and New Zealand. While I still have my knees are still functioning and I could do hikes and things. So the window is short, everybody. Come, I'd love to come visit you in Australia. and New Zealand.
Well, I'll come and carry your bags because I
Yeah,
want to go those places too.
yeah, I would love that. We'd have
uh,
fun. We'd have a lot of fun. Bringing it my idea of a good trip is a book that's set in that place, in a coffee shop, in that place, and then just slow wandering the streets of
oh,
Sydney or Melbourne or whatever, just taking it all in, the different ways that people interact. As a writer, you're always seeing
Uh-huh.
and taking things in. And so yeah, you and I could do that. We could flaneur together and sit in Melbourne or, somewhere in New Zealand. I'd love that.
Well, I love that concept too. And actually, something that I was thinking about a lot on our recent trip to France, and actually our first episode of this podcast. I have an interview with my husband and my oldest daughter talking a little bit about our trip to the Paris Olympics. But one of the things that I noted in this trip was the magic of slowing down. And
Mm,
the reason is because 2 years ago, I went on a school trip with my daughter to France and to England. And it was meant to be kind of an exposure trip. So it was like a whole list of things going here and going there. And we had an amazing tour guide. And I do not regret going on that trip at all. Was everything was just so packed. And even at the end of the night, sort of melting into bed exhausted, even though I knew that my brain and my heart were full of all these images that I somehow wanted to record. And so I was intentional in planning this past trip with my immediate family, with the five of us, where we would have some slow days, where
that's
we would
great.
get to sort of wander, like you said, and even to just try to teach my kids how to do that. When our pace of life is so different, like that's challenging. I think that's challenging for all of us because we
Yeah.
we move at this sprinting pace all the time.
Well, I'm a
So
really slow walker. I read that book by the theologian uh, Kazuo Kasuki or something. He wrote about how the pace of God is the pace of an ox, which is 3 miles an hour. Oh, it's called 3 Mile an Hour God. Yeah, 3 Mile an Hour God. And just that's my pace. I don't like to walk faster than that. We're going to go to Oxford for a week in about 2 weeks, and we've done this with a group of friends. We read for 9 months all the Narnia books,
oh,
one a month, and we did a discussion every month by Zoom. And so now we're going to go to kind of visit Oxford from C.S. Lewis's vantage point. And the last one we were just surprised by joy. But that's the kind of travel I like to do, Dorina. That sort of immersive, intentional, where
mm,
you're not just going and keep ticking off the tourist sites. I've done that, and there's room for that. Like you said,
yeah.
exposure trips are fine. But I'm at that stage of life now where I want to go slowly and take in things with my heart, my senses, my soul, and go, deeply wherever I go. Yeah.
Oh, that's a beautiful picture, and I think I'm more in that season of life too. As I close, I want to always ask people this question: how do you experience God's glory through travel? And I think you're already talking about it, but is there
Mhm.
anything else that you want to say related to that?
Yeah, I do feel like it's that receptive heart of being hosted by Jesus wherever I go. Part of it is my background of feeling homeless is
Mm,
that now in Christ the glory of God is that He is my homemaker, right? He makes me at home everywhere. And so
yeah.
He hosts me, He feasts me, He, invites me to the table and sets it for me, and my cup overflows, fills my cup, and surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. Because what a host we have, what a homemaker we have, what a gracious God. So it doesn't really tie to a place, but wherever I go,
Mm,
I feel that sense of Jesus being my host and my homemaker, and I take that in. So
mm,
right as we're talking, my window's looking out on these majestic redwoods, and there's the beauty of the earth, right? The beauty of nature, but there's also the beauty of small gestures between people on a bus when someone takes someone's bag for them, and
mm,
and that is that you grow in your ability to see that as you are hosted by the one who looks at those beautiful small gestures and says, "Look, honey, look at that." And you could see.
uh-huh.
So I love that, the glory of God in small things. I'm enjoying that.
Well, that's such a beautiful description. And I think really, truly, that's the essence of being a global glory chaser. So thank you for describing it for us. Thanks for your time, Mitali. I could talk to you for hours. I
Oh,
so appreciate your body of work, and I hope people will check out. She has books for kids of all ages, including adults. So we will share some of those in the show notes. Definitely look at her new picture book. And thank you for being with us today.
oh, thanks so much, Dorina.
Oh, thank you, my friend. Shalom. Hey there, friends. For today's episode, I want to give you three Global Glory Chasers recommendations. This is kind of a tradition on our show for this episode. It's just an opportunity that I have to share some fun resources with you related to books, food, and travel, and chasing God's glory. And so today, I want to start by recommending this beautiful book that was mentioned in our interview called Hope in the Valley by Mitali Perkins. This is a middle grade book released in 2023. And it's a book actually that I just finished reading myself. It was incredibly intriguing. I love how she talks about the mixed up life of Pandita Paul, the main character, and how this young woman who is in middle school, she's struggling with some of the normal things that teenagers struggle with, like friendship issues, and she also is navigating a journey of grief as she has lost her mother. And so we are drawn into the story from the very start. And today I wanted to read for you a short excerpt from the book, just to whet your appetite a little bit and give you a taste of Mitali's writing. She shared a little more of the book in our interview, but this is page 1 of Hope in the Valley by Mitali Perkins. Our front porch is a mess. Stepping around a discarded skateboard and a rusty tricycle, I avoid a couple of splintery wooden chairs and make my way down the steps. As I cross the street to the old Johnson place, I move slowly, casually, in case eyes are tracking me. The riskiest part of this escape is ducking behind the overgrown oleander bushes. But I'm careful, as always. There, now I'm hidden, but I'm not inside yet. Ma's makeshift wire twist still keeps the flap of fencing attached to its post. I unfasten it, and the section swings slightly into the abandoned Johnson property, like a gate, leaving just enough room for me to slip through. I came here almost every day last summer, and this summer I plan to do the same. That's one advantage to living with three busy people. I can come and go without a lot of questions. The first time I crawled through this opening, I was 4 years old. I'd followed Ma across the street and into the prickly rosemary bushes. When she spotted me, she smiled, led me inside, and asked me to keep her escape a secret. Now, I'm the only person on earth who knows how to get into Ashar Jega, as Ma and I called it. Ma's name, Asha, which means hope. Ma's place. Ashar Jega, place of hope. Friends, that was just the beginning of Hope in the Valley, and I hope you will check out this book. It's a great one to share if you have kids who are in the middle grades, or if you like to read aloud with younger kids as well. But I enjoyed it as an adult, and I was not reading it with any of my children. That brings us to our second recommendation for today, which is a movie called The Rickshaw Girl. And this is actually adapted from one of Mitali's books, The Rickshaw Girl. It was then adapted into a film by Sleeper Wave Productions. I will include the link in the show notes, but you can find it on Amazon Prime Video and other places that stream. I actually did watch this one with my daughters, and it was a fascinating story. I loved learning a little bit more about this main character. And this is a daring teenage girl who disguises herself as a boy and pedals a rickshaw on the gritty streets of Dhaka, Bangladesh, to earn extra cash for her struggling family. And all the while, she is pursuing her dream of becoming an artist. I loved her story. And so if you're looking for something that is good to watch, maybe with, again, kids who are in middle grade or high school, this is a great one that gives us a window into the culture of Bangladesh and the story of this teenage girl. Last but not least, I want to recommend to you our Global Glory Chasers program. Come explore the globe with us from the comfort of your home, friends. Our family has actually curated a robust list of books, recipes, music, dances, games, and video recommendations for your family to learn about countries and cultures that you might not be able to visit in today's circumstances. So, nurturing and nourishing connections with the world broadens our perspectives and our horizons. And we developed the Global Glory Chasers program for people to dive in a little bit deeper. And so if you want to hop over to my website, DorinaGilmore.com, you can click on culture and travel and find out a little bit more about that program. You can choose which country you're interested in learning more about and how you can go in a little bit deeper to that culture through music, through books, through movies, and food. We put together a fun food video for each of the countries so you can do some cooking of a recipe together with your family, and that's friendly. Or if you're a single or you're a grandparent, it might be something fun for you to try out. Friends, thank you for joining us for season 5, episode 2 of the Global Glory Chasers podcast, which is made possible and ad free by generous supporters who share through Substack. Substack is a publishing platform that I use. I share a free weekly Glorygram. It's kind of a newsletter, and there is an opportunity there if you want to donate towards our program so I can keep it ad free or to support the podcast in other ways. Hop over to DorinaGlorygram.substack.com and I'll put that link in the show notes as well. We will be right back here next Wednesday to drop our next episode of Global Glory Chasers. We are looking forward to a conversation with award-winning children's author and teacher, Marie Chan, about discovering God's glory through social justice. So friends, let's chase God's glory together this week.